Close your eyes and let the world around you soften. Let the hum of your day grow quiet. Tonight we are going somewhere ancient, somewhere so far back in time that the very ground beneath us was in a different place. The stars above us were in different positions, and the air itself carried different scents. We are going to the age of dinosaurs, not the cartoon version, not the theme park version, the real thing. A world where creatures of every imaginable shape and size filled forests, waded through rivers, soared above coastlines, and thundered across open plains. Some were gentle, some were terrifying, some were no bigger than a robin. Others were heavier than a fleet of trucks. Together, they formed one of the most extraordinary chapters in the history of life on Earth. A chapter that lasted so long and produced such staggering variety that we are still uncovering its secrets today. There is no need to remember any of this. There will be no quiz. Let the facts wash over you like a warm current, and if at any point you feel yourself drifting towards sleep, let it happen. That is exactly what this is for. The dinosaurs waited 66 million years for someone to tell their story. They can wait a little longer while you rest. So settle in, let your breathing slow, and let us begin at the beginning. Origins and timeline. The story of dinosaurs begins not with a thunderclap, but with a quiet entrance in a world already teeming with life. Roughly 231 million years ago, during the period geologists call the Triassic, the first dinosaurs appeared. They were modest creatures, small, bipedal, and unassuming. They shared their world with many other kinds of reptiles, amphibians, and early relatives of mammals. No one watching the Triassic landscape would have guessed that these particular animals were destined to dominate the planet. The earliest known dinosaurs include animals like Eoraptor, a slender predator about the size of a large house cat, discovered in the dusty badlands of northwestern Argentina. Its teeth suggest it ate both meat and plants, an opportunist making its way in a competitive world. Herrerasaurus, found in the same region, was somewhat larger, a more committed carnivore with grasping hands and serrated teeth, but still far from the giant predators that would come later. These were the humble founders of a dynasty that would last 165 million years. To appreciate that timescale, consider this. The entire span of recorded human history, every empire, every war, every invention, every language, fits within roughly 5,000 years. Human beings as a species have existed for perhaps 300,000 years. Dinosaurs reigned for more than 500 times that long. The Stegosaurus, which lived around 155 million years ago, was already ancient history by the time Tyrannosaurus walked the Earth 68 million years ago. More time separates Stegosaurus from Tyrannosaurus than separates Tyrannosaurus from us. The Mesozoic era, the grand age of dinosaurs, is divided into three periods. The Triassic came first, from about 252 to 201 million years ago, when dinosaurs were still newcomers finding their footing among other dominant reptiles. Then came the Jurassic, from 201 to 145 million years ago, when dinosaurs truly rose to prominence. Sauropods grew to colossal sizes, and the first birds began to evolve from small feathered theropods. Finally, the Cretaceous stretched from 145 to 66 million years ago, the longest and last act, during which dinosaurs reached their greatest diversity before the curtain fell. The world they lived in looked nothing like ours. During the early Triassic, nearly all of Earth's landmass was fused into a single supercontinent called Pangaea, a vast unbroken expanse stretching from pole to pole. Over the following tens of millions of years, Pangaea slowly broke apart. Rift valleys flooded with seawater. Narrow oceans widened. The continents drifted toward the positions we recognize today, carrying their dinosaur populations with them. This slow geological dance meant that dinosaurs that had once shared common ancestors became isolated on separate landmasses, evolving independently into wildly different forms. It is one reason why different continents produced such distinct dinosaur communities. Tyrannosaurs in North America, abelisaurs in South America, spinosaurs in North Africa, each shaped by the unique conditions of their drifting home. The transition from Triassic to Jurassic was itself marked by a mass extinction event around 201 million years ago, likely driven by massive volcanic eruptions. Many of the reptile groups that had competed with early dinosaurs vanished. The dinosaurs, for reasons not entirely understood, survived. With their competitors gone, they radiated into the ecological vacuums left behind, growing larger, more diverse, and more dominant with each passing million years. By the middle of the Jurassic, they had become the unchallenged rulers of the land. It was a position they would hold for over 100 million years. Body plans and breathing. Before we meet the individual stars of the dinosaur world, it helps to understand what made dinosaurs, as a group, so special, what set them apart from the other reptiles of their time, and what features allowed them to thrive for so astonishingly long. The name itself offers a starting point, even though it is slightly misleading. In 1842, the British anatomist Richard Owen examined fossils of three extraordinary animals, Megalosaurus, Iguanodon, and Hylaeosaurus, and realized they belonged to a group unlike any living reptile. He coined the term Dinosauria from two Greek words, dinos, meaning fearfully great, and sauros, meaning lizard. The name stuck, but Owen's initial assumption that these were essentially giant lizards was wrong. Dinosaurs were something far more sophisticated. The most fundamental difference lies in posture. If you watch a lizard move, you will notice that its legs splay outward from its body. Its belly rides low. Its gait is a side-to-side waddle, efficient enough for short bursts but exhausting over distance. Dinosaurs were entirely different. Their legs were positioned directly beneath their bodies, supporting their weight in a columnar stance, much like the legs of a horse, an elephant, or indeed a bird. This upright posture was revolutionary. It meant dinosaurs could walk, run, and sustain movement with far greater efficiency than any sprawling reptile. It also allowed for a much wider range of body sizes. You cannot build a 70-ton animal on splayed legs. The physics simply do not work. But on straight, pillar-like legs, the sky was, almost literally, the limit. Their skeletons were marvels of engineering in other ways too. Many dinosaur bones were not solid. They were hollow, reinforced with thin internal struts for strength, yet dramatically lighter than solid bone of the same size. This design appears throughout the dinosaur family tree, but is especially pronounced in theropods, the two-legged predators, and in sauropods, the long-necked giants. It is also, not coincidentally, the same design found in the bones of modern birds. Hollow bones are not fragile. They are a sophisticated solution to an engineering problem: how to build a skeleton strong enough to support immense forces while remaining light enough for efficient movement. A hollow tube, as any engineer will tell you, is stronger per unit of weight than a solid rod of the same material. These hollow spaces in the bones were not empty. They connected to a system of air sacs that extended throughout the body, much like the respiratory system of modern birds. In mammals, breathing works like a bellows. Air flows into the lungs, oxygen is extracted, and the same air flows back out. It is a tidal system, and it means that at any given moment the lungs contain a mixture of fresh and stale air. Dinosaurs, or at least many of them, used a different approach entirely. Air flowed through their lungs in one direction only, passing over gas exchange surfaces continuously. Fresh air sacs at the back pushed oxygen-rich air through the lungs, while spent air was expelled from sacs at the front. The result was a dramatically more efficient system. Every breath delivered a higher concentration of oxygen than a mammalian breath of the same volume. This respiratory advantage had profound consequences. It may have allowed dinosaurs to thrive in atmospheric conditions that varied considerably over the Mesozoic. It fueled the enormous metabolic demands of massive bodies, and it provided the physiological foundation for the active, energetic lifestyles that the fossil record increasingly reveals. Dinosaurs were not sluggish. Their bodies were built from the bones outward for a kind of vitality that the word reptile fails to capture. The giants, sauropods, of all the dinosaurs, none stretch the imagination quite like the sauropods. These were the long-necked, long-tailed, four-legged herbivores that grew to sizes no land animal has matched before or since. To encounter one would have been to stand in the shadow of a living building. The largest sauropods are found among the titanosaurs of South America. Argentinosaurus, known from massive vertebrae and limb bones discovered in Patagonia, may have weighed somewhere between 65 and 80 tons, depending on the reconstruction. Patagotitan, discovered more recently and known from more complete material, is estimated at roughly 57 to 70 tons. Either animal was heavier than two fully loaded cement trucks and stretched close to 100 feet from snout to tail tip. To stand beside one would be to crane your neck upward as though looking at the side of a four-story building made of warm, breathing flesh. How did they support such mass? The answer involves every trick in evolution's repertoire. Their leg bones were columnar and massive, built to bear weight like the pillars of a cathedral. Their vertebrae, despite their enormous size, were honeycombed with air chambers that reduced weight without compromising strength. The same pneumatic design found in bird bones, but scaled up to an almost absurd degree. A single vertebra from a large sauropod could be the size of an armchair, yet weigh far less than a solid bone of the same dimensions. Their necks were perhaps the most extraordinary feature of all. While every mammal on Earth, from a mouse to a giraffe, has exactly 7 cervical vertebrae, sauropods broke free of that constraint. Mamenchisaurus, a Chinese sauropod from the late Jurassic, possessed a neck stretching roughly 35 feet, supported by as many as 19 elongated cervical vertebrae. Each vertebra was a sculptural wonder, carved with hollows and ridges, attachment points for powerful muscles and ligaments, and internal chambers for air sacs that kept the structure light. The neck of Mamenchisaurus was longer than the entire body of a giraffe, from hooves to horn tips, and yet the animal carried it with apparent ease. Different sauropods used their necks in different ways, and this is part of what allowed so many giant species to coexist without directly competing for the same food. Brachiosaurus held its neck relatively upright, like a biological crane. Its front legs were longer than its hind legs, tilting its body upward and giving it a natural advantage for reaching the highest branches. Standing with its neck fully extended, a Brachiosaurus could browse at heights exceeding 40 feet, taller than a 5-story building. It would have been able to reach food that no other herbivore could touch, carving out an exclusive dining niche in the canopy. Diplodocus, by contrast, likely carried its neck in a more horizontal position. Rather than reaching skyward, it swept its neck from side to side in broad, low arcs, stripping vegetation across a wide area without needing to move its enormous body. Imagine it standing at the edge of a fern meadow, its 30-foot neck swaying gently like a massive pendulum, its pencil-shaped teeth raking leaves from low-growing plants in smooth, methodical passes. This horizontal feeding strategy turned the neck into a labor-saving device, a biological boom arm that harvested food with minimal effort. Some sauropods evolved features beyond sheer size. The titanosaurs, the last great lineage of sauropods which flourished during the Cretaceous, developed bony studs embedded in their skin called osteoderms. These ranged from small nodules to plates several inches across. While they probably offered some protection against predators, they may also have served as display features, catching light as the animals moved. Imagine a herd of titanosaurs crossing a Cretaceous floodplain at sunset, their hides glinting with rows of natural armor, the ground trembling with each synchronized step. Brachiosaurus had another curious feature: nostrils positioned unusually high on its skull, near the top of its head. For years, this led scientists to imagine these animals wading through lakes like giant hippos, using their elevated nostrils as snorkels. That idea has largely been abandoned. Sauropod bodies were too buoyant and their feet too poorly suited for muddy lake bottoms. But the placement remains intriguing. The nostrils may have been linked to enhanced airflow for cooling the brain, to sound production, or to inflatable display structures used in social signaling. Even something as simple as the position of a nostril can hide mysteries that paleontologists are still unraveling. Sauropods also had unusually small heads for their body size. A creature 100 feet long might have a skull barely 2 feet in length. This was not a design flaw, but a necessity. A heavy head at the end of a 30-foot neck would have been biomechanically catastrophic. By keeping the skull light and the teeth simple, sauropods minimized the load their necks had to support. They did not chew their food extensively. Instead, they stripped or cropped vegetation quickly and swallowed it, relying on their enormous digestive tracts, and in some cases internal grinding stones, to break it down. Efficiency, not elegance, was the governing principle, and for over 100 million years it worked spectacularly. Let yourself breathe for a moment, in and out, slowly. There is no rush. The Mesozoic lasted 186 million years. We have time. Imagine yourself standing on a broad, warm plain at the edge of a Jurassic river. The air is humid and sweet, carrying the resinous scent of conifers and the green fragrance of ferns. Dragonflies the size of your hand drift over the water, their wings catching sunlight. In the distance, a herd of sauropods moves slowly along the riverbank, their massive bodies reflected in the still water. The ground vibrates gently with each step, a rhythm so deep and steady it feels like the heartbeat of the earth itself. They are in no hurry. They have been here for millions of years, and they will be here for millions more. The river flows, the ferns sway, the dragonflies hover, and you stand quietly, watching, as time unfolds at the pace of a continent. Now let us continue. Speed and agility. Not every dinosaur was a lumbering titan. Some were built for pure, exhilarating speed. The ornithomimids, a family whose name means bird mimics, were among the fastest dinosaurs ever to live. Animals like Gallimimus and Struthiomimus had long, slender hind legs, compact torsos, and stiff tails that acted as dynamic counterbalances during high-speed running. Their body plan was strikingly similar to that of a modern ostrich: large eyes set in a small head, a toothless or nearly toothless beak, a graceful S-curved neck, and legs that seemed designed by an engineer obsessed with efficiency. Biomechanical studies estimate their top speeds at roughly 25 to 45 miles per hour, depending on the species and the modeling assumptions used. Even the conservative end of that range would outpace most humans. The fastest Olympic sprinters peak at about 27 miles per hour and can sustain it for only seconds. An ornithomimid in full stride may have maintained high speed over far greater distances. Watching one run would have been mesmerizing. Picture a herd of Gallimimus crossing a late Cretaceous plain, their strides long and rhythmic, their tails held rigid behind them for balance, their feet barely seeming to touch the ground before springing forward again. Dust rising in soft clouds behind them, the landscape blurring past. They moved with the fluid, effortless grace that only animals built for speed can achieve. But speed was not merely aesthetic, it was survival. In ecosystems stalked by massive predators, the ability to outrun a pursuer was the simplest and most reliable defense. Ornithomimids had no armor, no horns, no clubs. Their bodies carried no weapons at all. What they had was velocity, the ancient and universal answer to the problem of being hunted. For tens of millions of years, it was enough. Smaller theropods, too, could be surprisingly swift. Compsognathus, a tiny predator from the late Jurassic scarcely larger than a chicken, was likely a nimble sprinter that chased down insects and small lizards with quick, darting movements. At the other end of the size spectrum, even Tyrannosaurus, a creature weighing perhaps 8 or 9 tons, may have been capable of brisk movement. Estimates of its top speed vary widely, from a relatively sedate 12 miles per hour to a more impressive 25, depending on the biomechanical model. It was probably not a sustained runner, but it did not need to be. A short, explosive burst was enough to close the distance to prey. In the economy of predation, ambush and surprise often matter more than marathon endurance. The great predators. The predators of the Mesozoic were as varied as the prey they hunted. Each was shaped by its environment, its prey, and the long evolutionary pressures of competition and survival. Together, they represent some of the most formidable hunters the world has ever seen. Tyrannosaurus rex is, of course, the most famous. It lived during the last 2 million years of the Cretaceous, roughly 68 to 66 million years ago in what is now Western North America. Everything about it was built for power. Its skull was massive and broad, reinforced to withstand the enormous stresses generated by its bite. And what a bite it was! Studies using computer modeling and finite element analysis estimate its bite force at roughly 8,000 to 12,800 pounds, the highest of any land animal in the fossil record. Its teeth were not slender blades, but thick, conical, serrated pegs, sometimes compared in shape to robust bananas. They were designed not for delicate cutting, but for crushing. When a Tyrannosaurus bit down, it did not merely wound, it shattered bone. Fossilized prey animals bear puncture wounds and splintered skeletons that testify to this devastating force. Its arms, so often mocked for their small size, were not the vestigial jokes they appear to be. Each arm, though short, was packed with dense muscle and tipped with sharp claws. They could lift several hundred pounds. Their reduced size may have been an evolutionary trade-off. As the skull and jaws grew ever more powerful, the arms became less important for capturing prey and shrank accordingly. But they likely still served functions, gripping during mating, pinning struggling prey at close range, or leveraging the animal off the ground after rest. They were specialized tools, not useless appendages. What about its voice? The thunderous roar of Hollywood is almost certainly wrong. Tyrannosaurus was more closely related to birds and crocodilians than to lions. Comparisons with these living relatives suggest that it produced low-frequency vocalizations, deep, resonant booms or infrasonic rumbles that would have been felt as much as heard. Imagine standing on a Cretaceous floodplain as the air itself seems to vibrate with a bass note so deep it presses against your ribs. That is closer to the true voice of Tyrannosaurus than any cinematic roar. On the other side of the world and earlier in time, Giganotosaurus hunted the floodplains of what is now Argentina, roughly 98 million years ago. It was longer than Tyrannosaurus, stretching over 40 feet, with a skull exceeding 5 feet in length. But it was built differently. Where Tyrannosaurus was a tank, heavy, broad-skulled and designed for bone-crushing power, Giganotosaurus was leaner and probably lighter, perhaps 6 to 8 tons compared to the 8 or 9 of a large Tyrannosaurus. Its teeth were thinner and sharper, designed for slicing rather than crushing. It may have hunted by inflicting deep, bleeding wounds and then following its weakened prey, a strategy more like that of a great white shark than a crocodile. Its prey likely included the enormous sauropods of Patagonia, animals that dwarfed even Giganotosaurus itself. Bringing down such a giant would have required either group effort or extraordinary patience. Spinosaurus from North Africa broke almost every rule of what a large predator was supposed to be. With its elongated crocodile-like snout, conical teeth and the dramatic sail of neural spines rising from its back, it looked like nothing else in the dinosaur world. But the most extraordinary thing about Spinosaurus is where it hunted. Fossil evidence, including dense, heavy bones suited for ballast in water, a broad paddle-like tail, and nostrils set high on the skull, strongly suggests it was semi-aquatic. It may have spent much of its life in rivers and lakes, hunting fish and other aquatic prey, diving and swimming with powerful strokes of its tail. Imagine a predator longer than Tyrannosaurus gliding beneath the surface of a Cretaceous river, its sail cutting through the water like the fin of some prehistoric leviathan. It represents a startling departure from the image of dinosaurs as exclusively land-dwelling animals. Allosaurus, the great predator of the late Jurassic, was built more lightly than Tyrannosaurus but was no less deadly. Its skull was narrow and hatchet-shaped, and its upper jaw could open remarkably wide, perhaps allowing it to strike downward into prey like a biological axe. Bite mark evidence on sauropod bones suggests it attacked animals far larger than itself, possibly hunting cooperatively or targeting young and weakened individuals. For millions of years before tyrannosaurs rose to dominance, Allosaurus was the apex predator of its ecosystems. And then there was Carnotaurus, one of the strangest-looking predators to ever walk the earth. Its name means meat-eating bull, a reference to the two stout horns above its eyes that gave it a devilish profile. Its body was built for speed, deep chest, powerful legs, a streamlined torso, but its arms were almost comically tiny, even shorter and more reduced than those of Tyrannosaurus, with stiff joints that allowed virtually no movement. Their function, if any, remains a mystery. Some researchers have suggested they played a role in mating displays. Others believe they were simply evolutionary remnants, reduced to near uselessness as other parts of the body became more important. Despite this oddity, Carnotaurus was a formidable predator, fast and agile, capable of running down prey with terrifying efficiency. Evolution does not always produce sleek perfection. Sometimes it produces something wonderfully strange: teeth and digestion. The mouths of dinosaurs were as diverse as the animals themselves, each one a specialized toolkit shaped by millions of years of dietary evolution. Among the herbivores, the most sophisticated dental systems belonged to the hadrosaurs, the broad-snouted, duck-billed dinosaurs that roamed every continent during the late Cretaceous. Their jaws contained dental batteries, tightly packed columns of teeth arranged in rows, with new teeth constantly forming beneath the surface and pushing upward to replace worn ones. A single hadrosaur could carry over 1,000 teeth in its jaws at any given time, though only a fraction were in active use. The grinding surfaces worked like a self-sharpening mill, crushing fibrous vegetation with an efficiency that rivaled the chewing systems of modern mammals. No other reptile before or since has matched the hadrosaur's dental engineering. Tooth replacement was not unique to hadrosaurs. Many dinosaurs grew new teeth throughout their lives, a trait inherited from their reptilian ancestors and still seen today in crocodilians and sharks. Tyrannosaurus grew a replacement tooth roughly every 2 to 3 months. Predators that crunched through bone needed a constant supply of fresh teeth, and evolution ensured they had one. Herbivores that ground tough plants all day needed even faster turnover. The result was a dental conveyor belt, rows of teeth in various stages of growth, visible in fossilized jaws like frames in a stop-motion film, each one a snapshot of an ongoing biological process. Some herbivorous dinosaurs lacked effective chewing teeth entirely. Without the ability to grind food in their mouths, they needed another solution, and they found one in the most unlikely of places: rocks. Certain species swallowed smooth stones called gastroliths, which tumbled inside their muscular stomachs, mechanically pulverizing food in much the same way that modern chickens use grit. Fossil skeletons have been found with clusters of polished, rounded stones nestled among the ribs. Internal millstones carried inside living bodies. The stones show the distinctive smoothness of long tumbling, evidence that they were not swallowed by accident but served a deliberate digestive purpose. It is a strategy as old as it is simple, and it bridged the gap between what the mouth could not do and what the stomach needed. The waste products of dinosaur digestion have also survived the ages in a form that scientists call coprolites, fossilized dung. These unglamorous specimens are gold mines of information. Inside them, paleontologists have found fragments of bone, seeds, plant fibers, and even shell, revealing not just what dinosaurs could eat, but what they actually did eat. One extraordinary coprolite, attributed to a large theropod and possibly Tyrannosaurus, weighed more than 40 pounds and contained crushed bone fragments, a direct record of predatory power and digestive efficiency preserved in the most humble form imaginable. Even more intimate are fossils that preserve actual stomach contents. A specimen of Microraptor, a small four-winged theropod from China, contained the remains of a bird in its gut. Proof that this tiny predator hunted in the trees and captured prey with speed and precision. Another fossil preserves a mammal inside the stomach of a larger dinosaur. These snapshots of final meals are among the most vivid windows we have into the daily reality of dinosaur life, the endless cycle of hunger, pursuit, capture and digestion that drove every ecosystem of the Mesozoic, armor and defense. Life in the Mesozoic was a relentless arms race. As predators grew larger, faster and more powerful, their prey evolved ever more elaborate defenses. The result was an astonishing gallery of natural armor and weaponry. The ankylosaurs were, quite simply, living tanks. From head to tail, their bodies were sheathed in osteoderms, thick plates of bone embedded in the skin, arranged in overlapping rows like medieval armor. Some plates bore ridges, spikes, or keels that added further deterrence. Even the eyelids of certain species were armored. This natural plating was dense enough to resist the bite of almost any predator. Fossilized ankylosaurs sometimes show healed bite marks, proof that they survived attacks that would have killed any less protected animal. And as a final measure, many ankylosaurs wielded a devastating weapon at the tip of their tails, a club of fused bone, dense and heavy, that could be swung with enormous force. Biomechanical studies suggest that a direct hit from an ankylosaur's tail club could shatter the leg bones of an attacking predator. These animals were not just defended, they were armed. Stegosaurus, that icon of the Jurassic, carried a very different defensive arrangement. Along its back rose a double row of tall, diamond-shaped bony plates. For decades, their function was debated. Were they armor? Solar panels for thermoregulation? Display structures? The current consensus leans toward display and temperature regulation. The plates were richly supplied with blood vessels and likely flushed with color, making the animal look larger and more imposing to both rivals and predators. But the real weapon was at the back. The tail of Stegosaurus ended in a cluster of long, sharp spikes, usually 4, that paleontologists informally call the Thagomizer, a name that originated in a 1982 Gary Larson cartoon and has since been adopted in genuine scientific literature. These spikes could reach several feet in length, and fossil specimens show breakage and damage consistent with active use in combat. A muscular sweep of a Stegosaurus tail would have driven those spikes into flesh with lethal force. Stegosaurus is also famous for having a remarkably small brain relative to its body size. An adult weighing 2 or 3 tons carried a brain roughly the size of a lime. Not a walnut, as the popular myth insists, but still extraordinarily small. For years, some speculated that Stegosaurus must have had a secondary nerve cluster near its hips, a sort of auxiliary brain to control the back half of its body. Modern research has dismissed this idea. The small brain simply reflects a slow, plant-focused lifestyle with little need for complex problem-solving. Stegosaurus did not need to be clever. It needed to eat, avoid threats, and reproduce. Its plates, spikes, and sheer bulk handled the rest. Intelligence is only one strategy for survival, and Stegosaurus proved that armor and weaponry could substitute for it quite effectively. The ceratopsians, the horned dinosaurs, combined offensive and defensive features with spectacular visual display. Triceratops, the most famous, bore 2 brow horns that could exceed 3 feet in length, curving forward like polished lances, along with a shorter nose horn. Fossil evidence shows scratches, wear, and healed fractures on these horns, suggesting they were used in combat both against predators and against rivals of their own species. Behind the horns stretched a wide bony frill, a sheet of bone extending from the back of the skull. This frill was probably too thin in places to serve as effective armor. Instead, it was almost certainly a display structure, a biological billboard advertising species, identity, maturity, health, and readiness to mate. The diversity of frill shapes across ceratopsian species is extraordinary. Scalloped edges, elaborate spikes, smooth curves, fenestrated windows of bone. Each species wore its own unique crest, as distinctive as a coat of arms. And then there were the pachycephalosaurs, the dome-headed dinosaurs. Their skulls featured thick caps of solid bone, sometimes more than 10 inches thick, with additional knobs and spikes around the margins. The leading hypothesis is that these domes were used in intraspecific combat. Contests between members of the same species for dominance or mating rights, much like the headbutting of modern bighorn sheep. Fossils reveal healed depressions and damage on the dome surfaces consistent with repeated impacts. Picture 2 pachycephalosaurs squaring off on a Cretaceous hillside, circling each other before lunging forward, their domes colliding with a crack that echoes through the forest. Whether all encounters were full contact or some were ritualized displays remains debated, but the evidence for physical competition is strong. Raptors and small predators. Hollywood gave the world an image of raptors as sleek, 6-foot-tall, scaly killers that hunted in ruthless packs. The reality was different in almost every particular, and in many ways more interesting. True velociraptor from the late Cretaceous of Mongolia was about the size of a turkey. It weighed perhaps 15 to 20 pounds. Its body was covered not in scales but in feathers. We know this because fossils preserve quill knobs on the forearm bones. the same attachment points that anchor flight feathers in modern birds. In life, Velociraptor would have looked more like a lanky, predatory hawk than the green-skinned monster of the movies. Its snout was long and narrow, its eyes sharp, its movements quick and bird-like. But do not let the modest size deceive you. Each of Velociraptor's hind feet carried a sickle-shaped claw on the second toe. A curved, wickedly sharp talon several inches long, held off the ground during walking to keep its edge keen. In an attack, this claw could slash downward with precision, piercing and gripping prey. Microscopic analysis of fossilized raptor claws reveals edges that, when fresh, would have been sharp enough to cut through flesh as cleanly as a surgical blade. Combined with grasping forelimbs and a jaw full of small serrated teeth, Velociraptor was a supremely efficient predator for its size. One of the most famous fossils in all of paleontology captures a Velociraptor locked in mortal combat with a Protoceratops, a sheep-sized herbivore. The two animals died together, frozen mid-battle by a sudden sandstorm or collapsing dune. The Velociraptor's killing claw is embedded in the Protoceratops' throat. The Protoceratops has clamped its beak onto the Velociraptor's arm. It is a snapshot of raw, desperate struggle preserved for 75 million years. Deinonychus, a larger relative from North America, is the animal that actually inspired the oversized raptors of the movies. At roughly 11 feet long and perhaps 150 pounds, it was considerably bigger than Velociraptor, though still far smaller than its cinematic portrayal. Deinonychus carried the same signature sickle claw, scaled up to frightening proportions. The discovery of multiple Deinonychus skeletons near the remains of a large herbivore called Tenontosaurus fueled the famous pack-hunting hypothesis. The idea that these animals coordinated attacks like wolves. But this interpretation has come under increasing scrutiny. Some paleontologists now argue that the clustering of skeletons may reflect independent scavengers drawn to the same carcass, or even that the raptors were not cooperating but competing at a kill site. Modern comparisons with Komodo dragons, which mob prey individually rather than cooperatively, offer an alternative model. The truth may lie somewhere in between, but the image of disciplined raptor packs has grown more uncertain. At the edges of the raptor world, evolution experimented with stranger designs. Yiqi, a tiny theropod from China, possessed elongated fingers supporting membranous wings, not feathered wings like a bird, but leathery sails like a bat. It may have glided between trees in the forests of the Middle Jurassic, a bizarre evolutionary dead end that tested the boundaries of dinosaurian flight. Other small theropods spread feathered limbs wide to catch air currents, drifting from branch to branch like flying squirrels. These experiments in gliding and proto-flight remind us that the path from dinosaur to bird was not a straight line. It was a thicket of branching experiments, most of which led nowhere, but one of which eventually gave rise to the entire world of modern birds. Feathers and colour. For most of the 20th century, dinosaurs were imagined in shades of grey, green and brown, drab, scaly, vaguely crocodilian creatures lumbering through dreary swamps. That image is now as dead as the animals it depicted. A revolution in fossil discovery, centered largely on the lake beds of northeastern China, has revealed that many dinosaurs were feathered, colourful and visually spectacular. The revolution began in 1996 with the announcement of Sinosauropteryx, a small theropod from the Yixian formation of Liaoning province. It was the first non-avian dinosaur found with unmistakable evidence of feathery integument, simple filaments covering its body like downy fuzz. The discovery was electrifying. In the years that followed, a flood of feathered dinosaurs emerged from the same deposits. Caudipteryx with its fan-like tail plumes, Microraptor with long feathers on both arms and legs forming 4 wings, and Chionis with detailed plumage that could be analysed for colour. Each new fossil pushed the boundaries of what we thought dinosaurs looked like. The feathers ranged from simple filaments, hair-like structures that probably served as insulation, to complex vanned feathers identical in structure to those used by modern birds for flight. Some species bore crests, fans, and streamers of elaborate plumage that could only have served for display. The picture that emerged was of a Mesozoic world far more visually dynamic than anyone had imagined. Then came the colors. Within fossilized feathers, scientists discovered melanosomes, microscopic organelles that produce pigment. Melanosomes come in different shapes and sizes, and each shape correlates with a specific color in modern birds. By mapping the melanosomes in fossil feathers and comparing them to those in living species, researchers could reconstruct the actual colors of dinosaurs that had been dead for over 100 million years. The results were astonishing. Anchiornis, a small theropod from the late Jurassic, was revealed to have a largely black and white body with a russet red crown of feathers, a color scheme more reminiscent of a woodpecker than a reptile. Sinosauropteryx had a banded tail of alternating reddish brown and white stripes, a pattern that researchers interpreted as camouflage. Microraptor possessed iridescent black plumage that would have shimmered with blue and green highlights in sunlight, much like the feathers of a modern crow or starling. These discoveries fundamentally changed how we picture the ancient world. The Mesozoic was not grey. It was a world of colour. Iridescent flashes in forest canopies, bold stripes on darting predators, elaborate crests and fans displayed during mating rituals. Some species likely used colour for camouflage, blending into dappled forest floors with mottled patterns that broke up their outlines. Others probably used bold contrasting colours to intimidate rivals or signal fitness to potential mates, much as modern birds of paradise use extravagant plumage in their courtship dances. Even the large non-feathered dinosaurs were not necessarily drab. Skin impressions from hadrosaurs reveal complex patterns of scales in varying sizes, suggesting that texture and perhaps pigment varied across the body. Ceratopsian frills were rich with blood vessels, hinting that they could have flushed with colour during social interactions. The dinosaurs dressed for a world we are only now beginning to see clearly, a world alive with visual spectacle, sound, and senses. Colour was only one channel of communication in the Mesozoic. Sound was another, and the evidence suggests that some dinosaurs used it in ways both haunting and sophisticated. The hadrosaur Parasaurolophus carried what may be the most remarkable sound-producing structure ever evolved by a land animal. Its hollow crest curved backward from the skull in an elegant arc stretching up to 6 feet long. Inside were looping nasal passages, tubes of bone that coiled through the crest before connecting back to the throat. When air was pushed through these passages, the crest functioned as a natural resonating chamber, amplifying and modulating sound. Computer simulations of the crest's acoustics produced deep, foghorn-like tones, low, rich and vibrating, capable of carrying across miles of open terrain. Imagine a late Cretaceous evening. A herd of Parasaurolophus grazes along a riverbank. As the light fades, one lifts its head and releases a long, resonant call that rolls across the floodplain like distant thunder. Another answers from farther away, its voice slightly different in pitch, perhaps an indication of size, sex, or individual identity. Others join, and the air fills with overlapping tones, a chorus of prehistoric music unlike anything the modern world produces. Different hadrosaur species had differently shaped crests, which means each species would have produced a distinct sound, nature's way of ensuring that calls reach the right audience. Some dinosaurs may have communicated at frequencies below the threshold of human hearing. Infrasound, sound waves with frequencies below 20 Hz, travels enormous distances and can even propagate through the ground. Modern elephants use infrasonic calls to communicate across miles of savanna. Whales use them to sing across entire ocean basins. Fossil evidence from hadrosaur skulls, including the structure of the inner ear and the configuration of the nasal passages, suggests that at least some species were sensitive to these ultra-low frequencies. If so, dinosaur herds could have maintained contact across vast distances, coordinating migrations and warning of dangers with signals that would have been completely inaudible to us. Predators, too, had formidable sensory equipment. Tyrannosaurus possessed enormous olfactory bulbs, the brain structures responsible for processing smell, suggesting a sense of smell as keen as a modern vulture's. Its forward-facing eyes gave it binocular vision with excellent depth perception, ideal for judging distances to prey. It could probably see you long before you saw it and smell you before either. These were not mindless brutes. They were sensory specialists, fine-tuned by evolution for the specific demands of finding and subduing prey. In the polar regions, where winter brought months of near-total darkness, some dinosaurs may have evolved enhanced night vision. Fossils of polar species sometimes show proportionally large eye sockets, suggesting eyes adapted for low-light conditions. These animals lived at latitudes where the sun barely rose for half the year. Navigating, finding food, and avoiding predators in perpetual twilight demanded senses sharpened far beyond what tropical species required. Pause again. Let the sounds of the modern world fall away. Feel the pillow beneath your head, the blanket across your body. Let the tension in your jaw release. Let your shoulders soften. Let your hands rest open and still. The Mesozoic night was not silent. Insects sang in the underbrush, chirps and hums and rattles that would not sound entirely unfamiliar to modern ears. Frogs called from the edges of ponds. The wind moved through conifers with a sound like the sea, and beneath it all, the low, almost inaudible vibrations of dinosaurs communicating across distances. Calls too deep for our ears, but felt in the chest like the bass notes of a distant orchestra. Close your eyes and listen to the silence of your room. Beneath the silence, there are always sounds. The hum of a house settling, the distant murmur of traffic, the soft rhythm of your own heart. Millions of years ago, the Mesozoic night had its own silence and its own hidden sounds. Both are gone now, except in our imagining, but imagining is its own kind of preservation. Eggs and parenting. Every dinosaur, no matter how massive it eventually grew, began its life in an egg, and the eggs themselves were as varied as the animals they contained. The smallest dinosaur eggs known to science are barely larger than a marble. Delicate, thin-shelled ovals attributed to tiny theropods. From these fragile beginnings hatched creatures no bigger than a human hand, feathered and blinking, their survival uncertain from the very first moment. At the other end of the scale, the eggs of giant sauropods could exceed a foot in length, larger than a basketball. Even these enormous eggs were small relative to the adults they would produce. A creature that would eventually weigh 70 tons began its life inside a shell weighing a few pounds. Nature imposed a size limit on eggs. Beyond a certain point, the shell must be so thick to support itself that oxygen cannot reach the embryo inside. This constraint meant that even the largest dinosaurs began life in a state of extreme vulnerability. Many sauropods compensated for this vulnerability with sheer numbers. Fossilized nesting grounds reveal hundreds of eggs clustered together, suggesting that herds returned year after year to the same sites. much like sea turtles returning to the same beach, and laid vast clutches to maximize the chance that at least some hatchlings would survive. The strategy was one of quantity over individual investment. Produce as many offspring as possible and hope that the odds favor a few. Other dinosaurs took the opposite approach, investing heavily in fewer offspring. The story of Oviraptor is one of paleontology's great reversals. When the first skeleton was discovered in Mongolia in the 1920s, it was found crouched near a nest of eggs. Scientists assumed it was raiding the nest and named it accordingly, Oviraptor, the egg thief. It was a name that stuck for decades. But in the 1990s, new discoveries revealed the truth. The eggs were not stolen. They belonged to the Oviraptor itself. The animal had been brooding its own clutch, wings spread protectively over the eggs in a posture identical to that of a modern hen. Some specimens were found preserved in this position after being buried by sudden sandstorms, suggesting the parents refused to abandon their nests even as the sand closed in around them. The egg thief was, in reality, a devoted parent. Oviraptor was not unique. Multiple species of theropod dinosaur have been found preserved atop nests, forelimbs spread wide, bodies crouched to provide warmth and protection. These postures are so similar to those of incubating birds that the evolutionary connection is unmistakable. The instinct to brood, to shelter eggs with one's own body, is ancient, far older than any living bird species. The hadrosaur Maiasaura, whose name means good mother lizard, provides evidence of parenting that extended well beyond egg-laying. At a site in Montana called Egg Mountain, paleontologists discovered vast nesting colonies containing eggs, hatchlings, juveniles, and adults. The hatchlings' leg bones were too underdeveloped for independent movement, meaning they must have stayed in the nest for weeks or months, depending on their parents for food and protection. The nesting colony itself suggests social organization, dozens of families nesting in proximity, returning season after season with enough coordination to share space without constant conflict. Some hatchlings entered the world with temporary adaptations that disappeared as they grew. Certain species were born with small, sharp teeth suited for nipping insects or soft plant material, a diet they would outgrow as their jaws developed the grinding surfaces of adult herbivores. It is a reminder that dinosaur development was dynamic, with bodies and diets transforming dramatically through life stages. And the pace of that transformation could be breathtaking. Bone studies reveal growth rings, much like the rings of a tree, that show how quickly some dinosaurs packed on size. Large sauropods could gain dozens of pounds every single day during their peak growth phase, rocketing from vulnerable hatchlings weighing a few pounds to multi-ton juveniles within just a few years. The metabolic furnace required to fuel such growth was immense, and it helps explain why dinosaurs needed such efficient respiratory and digestive systems. Growing that fast, in a world full of predators, was not a luxury, it was a survival imperative. Herds and migration. Some of the most evocative dinosaur fossils are not bones at all, but footprints. Preserved in ancient mud and hardened into stone, these trackways offer a direct window into how dinosaurs actually moved through their world. And the picture they paint is one of complex, dynamic social behavior. Vast fossilized trackways, some stretching for miles, show dozens or even hundreds of dinosaurs walking together in the same direction. Sauropod tracks reveal herds moving in formation, with the largest individuals on the outside and smaller juveniles sheltered in the center. The same defensive arrangement used by elephants and musk oxen today. The spacing between prints tells us about speed and gait. Some tracks show animals strolling at a leisurely pace, others show faster movement, perhaps driven by a need to reach water or escape an approaching storm. Predator tracks sometimes appear alongside those of herbivore herds, snapshots of stalking behavior frozen in stone. Some of the most poignant trackways show large footprints accompanied by much smaller ones moving side by side. A parent and child walking together across a Cretaceous landscape. The smaller tracks stay close to the larger ones, suggesting dependence, guidance, protection. These are not the footprints of solitary wanderers. They are evidence of family bonds expressed in the simplest possible way, one step after another, together. Other trackways reveal behavior that goes beyond simple walking. Some preserve the marks of dinosaurs running, their strides lengthened, their toes digging deep into the mud with urgency. Others show resting poses where animals crouched low and left impressions of bellies, tails, and even hands in soft ground. In rare cases, tracks show dinosaurs sliding on muddy slopes, their claws scraping furrows in the earth, perhaps struggling for balance, perhaps simply negotiating difficult terrain. These traces transform fossils from static artifacts into snapshots of movement and behavior, brief frames from the long film of Mesozoic life. Migration, too, may have been part of the dinosaur repertoire. Isotope studies of fossilized teeth can reveal the chemical signatures of the water sources an animal drank from during its life. When those signatures match water sources hundreds of miles apart, they suggest long-distance travel, seasonal movements driven by the need to follow food, water, or favorable climate conditions. Evidence from North America suggests that herds of hadrosaurs may have migrated hundreds of miles between summer feeding grounds and winter refuges, much as caribou and wildebeest do today. The logistics of such journeys, mothers guiding young, the herd maintaining cohesion across vast distances, predators shadowing the moving column, paint a picture of a Mesozoic world as dynamic and interconnected as any modern ecosystem. Even the width and depth of individual footprints carry information. Some of the largest tracks ever found, left by sauropods, stretch more than 3 feet across. Wider than a human body is tall. Standing inside one of these prints today is a disorienting experience. The sheer scale of the impression conveys, more viscerally than any skeleton in a museum, the reality of what once walked this earth. A global dynasty. Dinosaurs were not confined to a single region or climate. They were a planetary phenomenon. Fossils have been recovered from every continent on Earth, including both polar regions in environments ranging from lush tropical forests to frigid, lightless polar winters. No group of land animals before or since has achieved such comprehensive global dominance. During the early Mesozoic, the supercontinent Pangaea provided a continuous landmass that allowed dinosaurs to spread freely from equator to pole. As Pangaea fragmented over the following tens of millions of years, populations became stranded on drifting continents, evolving in isolation. South America, slowly separating from Africa, became a nursery for the largest sauropods and some of the biggest predators. Asia's rift lakes preserved the delicate feathered theropods that would rewrite our understanding of dinosaur biology. North America yielded rich assemblages of tyrannosaurs, ceratopsians, and hadrosaurs. Australia, Africa, Europe, each contributed unique species shaped by local conditions and geography. The slow drift of continents was like a great experiment in evolutionary isolation, running simultaneously across the globe. The most striking discoveries, though, may be those from the polar regions. During the Cretaceous, Antarctica was vastly different from the frozen continent we know today. It occupied a position closer to its current latitude, but global temperatures were far warmer and the continent was blanketed in dense forests of conifers, ferns, and flowering plants. Rivers threaded through the landscape. The soil was rich and dark. Sauropods, theropods, and ornithopods left their bones here, proof that dinosaurs thrived even at the bottom of the world. These Antarctic dinosaurs experienced extreme seasonal cycles, months of continuous summer daylight followed by months of near-total winter darkness. Surviving these conditions required adaptations we can only infer. Perhaps thickened, feathery coats for insulation, perhaps the ability to slow metabolism during the lean months, perhaps food storage strategies we have not yet imagined. At the opposite pole, fossils from Alaska and other Arctic regions revealed dinosaurs that may have been year-round residents rather than seasonal visitors. Hadrosaurs, tyrannosaurs, and smaller theropods all left bones in sediments that show clear evidence of cold conditions. Not the tropical warmth of equatorial Mesozoic forests, but cool, temperate, and occasionally freezing environments. These animals endured short growing seasons, long winters, and stretches of near-perpetual darkness. Some may have had enhanced night vision, with large eyes adapted for low-light conditions. Others may have relied on social behavior, huddling, communal nesting, cooperative vigilance, to survive conditions that would challenge any modern reptile. The dinosaurs were not creatures of the tropics alone, they were masters of extremes, adapted to the full spectrum of conditions Earth's climate could offer. Imagine the northernmost dinosaur herds moving through stunted boreal forests as the first snows of autumn begin to fall. Steam rising from their warm bodies, their calls echoing across a frozen landscape that stretches unbroken toward a horizon where the sun barely rises. It is a vision of prehistoric life at the edge of possibility, and the fossils prove it was real. Mysteries and oddities. For every well-understood dinosaur, there is another that defies easy explanation. A creature so strange, so seemingly improbable, that it reminds us how much we still do not know. Therizinosaurus, from the late Cretaceous of Mongolia, possessed claws that are among the most extraordinary structures ever produced by evolution. Each claw on its forelimbs could reach over 3 feet in length, elongated, gently curved, tapering to a point like enormous scythes. When the first claw fossils were discovered in the 1940s, scientists initially assumed they belonged to a giant turtle-like reptile. Only later, as more complete skeletons were found, did the true picture emerge. Therizinosaurus was a theropod, a member of the same broad group that includes Tyrannosaurus and Velociraptor, but it had abandoned the predatory lifestyle of its relatives. It was an herbivore, or at least an omnivore, using those immense claws not for killing but for pulling down branches, stripping bark, or digging into termite mounds. Its body was stout and pot-bellied, built to accommodate the large gut that a plant-based diet required. It walked on 2 legs, held its body upright, and may have been covered in feathers. Imagine encountering it, a creature the size of a delivery truck, upright like a bear, adorned with feathers and armed with claws longer than broadswords. There is nothing alive today that remotely resembles it. Dinosaurus, also from Mongolia, was another mystery that took decades to solve. In 1965, a pair of enormous arms, over 8 feet long, tipped with heavy claws, were found in the Gobi Desert. For nearly 50 years, the rest of the animal was unknown. The arms alone were so massive that they fueled wild speculation. Was this a mega-predator with limbs of terrifying reach? When more complete material was finally found in 2014, the truth was far stranger than anyone had guessed. Dinosaurus was an ornithomimosaur, a relative of the ostrich-mimic dinosaurs, but scaled up to monstrous proportions. It stood over 16 feet tall, weighed several tons, and had a humped back, a deep lower jaw that formed a broad spoon-shaped beak, and a body plan that seemed cobbled together from parts of several different animals. It was probably an omnivore, wading in shallow waters and scooping up fish, plants, and whatever else it could find. It is a reminder that the Mesozoic was full of evolutionary experiments so bizarre that even paleontologists who have spent their careers studying dinosaurs are sometimes left shaking their heads. Nigersaurus, a sauropod from Cretaceous North Africa, had one of the most unusual skulls of any dinosaur. Its mouth was extraordinarily wide and flattened, almost like a vacuum cleaner nozzle, with more than 500 replacement teeth packed into columns along the front edge of its jaws. It fed by holding its head close to the ground and sweeping back and forth, clipping low-growing vegetation with remarkable efficiency. CT scans of its skull reveal that its brain was oriented with its face pointing almost straight down, suggesting that looking at the ground was its default posture. It was, in essence, a living lawnmower, a creature so specialized for one particular feeding strategy that every part of its anatomy was bent to that single purpose. Amargasaurus, a relatively small sauropod from Argentina, carried a double row of tall neural spines along its neck and upper back that may have supported either a pair of sails or were sheathed in keratin, forming twin rows of spikes. The function is debated: thermoregulation, display, defense. But the visual effect would have been striking. A sauropod wearing a mohawk of bone and skin, unlike anything else in its ecosystem. And Pachyrhinosaurus, a ceratopsian from the late Cretaceous of North America, had no prominent horns at all. Instead of the long brow horns of its cousin Triceratops, it bore a massive, flattened boss of rough bone on its nose and above its eyes. A thick pad that may have been covered in keratin and used in shoving contests with rivals, like the boss-to-boss combat of modern bison or Cape buffalo. Its frill was adorned with smaller hornlets and spikes, making it one of the more elaborately ornamented ceratopsians, despite its lack of the signature long horns. These oddities, Therizinosaurus with its scythes, Deinocheirus with its mystery arms, Nigersaurus with its vacuum mouth, Amargasaurus with its twin sails, are not footnotes. They are the rule. For every dinosaur that fits neatly into a familiar category, there are a dozen that confound expectations. The Mesozoic was not a world of templates and repetitions. It was a world of relentless invention, where evolution tried everything, no matter how improbable, and where the results continue to surprise us every time a new fossil is pried from the rock. Intelligence and the mind. We tend to measure intelligence by our own standards, and by those standards, most dinosaurs seem unremarkable. Their brains were generally small relative to their body mass, far smaller, proportionally, than those of modern mammals. But brain size alone is a crude measure, and the story of dinosaur cognition is more interesting than the numbers alone suggest. Among the theropods, the troodontids stand out. Troodon, a small predator from the late Cretaceous of North America, had one of the largest brain-to-body ratios of any known dinosaur. Its brain was proportionally comparable to those of some modern birds, which are, as a group, far more intelligent than most people assume. Troodon had large, forward-facing eyes that gave it excellent binocular vision and depth perception, particularly useful for a predator hunting small, quick-moving prey in low-light conditions. Its inner ear structures suggest good balance and spatial awareness. Some paleontologists have speculated that if the asteroid had not struck, troodontids might have continued evolving along a trajectory of increasing intelligence, though such speculation is inherently unprovable. Dromaeosaurids, the raptor family, also show signs of relatively sophisticated brains. The enlarged portions of their brains associated with coordination, vision, and problem-solving suggest animals capable of complex behavior. Whether this extended to genuine cooperative hunting, as has been debated, remains uncertain. But at a minimum, these were animals that could assess their environment, make rapid decisions, and execute precise physical actions. The neurological requirements of an active, agile predator. Hadrosaurs and ceratopsians, though they were herbivores with less reason for predatory cunning, show evidence of sophisticated social behavior that implies its own form of intelligence. Living in herds, recognizing individuals, communicating across distances, coordinating group movements, and caring for young over extended periods all require brain structures dedicated to social processing. Modern animals that live in complex social groups, elephants, dolphins, wolves, have disproportionately large brain regions devoted to social cognition. Hadrosaurs and ceratopsians may have had analogous adaptations, even if their overall brain sizes were modest. At the other extreme, the sauropods and ankylosaurs had brains that were remarkably small even by dinosaur standards. A multi-ton stegosaurus carried a brain roughly the size of a lime. An enormous sauropod's brain was barely larger, but these animals did not need to outsmart their enemies. Their survival strategies, massive size, armor, herding, and the sheer inertia of being too large to be easily killed placed different demands on their nervous systems. A sauropod needed excellent proprioception, the ability to sense the position and movement of its enormous body, more than it needed problem-solving skills. An ankylosaur needed reliable reflexes to swing its tail club with devastating accuracy. Intelligence is not a single axis with cleverness at one end and stupidity at the other. It is a landscape of trade-offs, and every dinosaur found a cognitive niche that matched its ecological one. The intelligence of dinosaurs, like so much else about them, was shaped by the demands of their lives. The small, agile predators had quick, sharp minds. The social herbivores had minds tuned for communication and coordination. The armored tanks had minds built for reliability and reflex. None of them needed to be human smart. They needed to be dinosaur smart. And for 165 million years, that was more than enough. Dinosaurs and the plant kingdom. The story of dinosaurs cannot be separated from the story of the plants they ate, sheltered among, and helped shape. For most of the Mesozoic, the botanical world was dominated by ancient lineages. Ferns carpeted the forest floor, cycads rose in sturdy trunks topped with crowns of stiff fronds, conifers towered overhead, and ginkgos added their fan-shaped leaves to the canopy. It was a green world, but a world without flowers. That changed during the Middle Cretaceous, roughly 100 million years ago, when a new kind of plant began to spread, the angiosperms, or flowering plants. Their arrival was quiet at first. Early angiosperms were small, weedy, and inconspicuous, filling gaps in the understory and colonizing disturbed ground. But their reproductive strategy was revolutionary. Brightly colored petals attracted insects and other animals for pollination. Fruits encased seeds in nutritious packages that encouraged animals to eat them and carry the seeds far from the parent plant. Rapid growth rates let them outcompete slower-growing competitors in newly opened habitats. By the end of the Cretaceous, angiosperms had transformed nearly every terrestrial ecosystem. The world the last dinosaurs walked through was alive with blossoms, heavy with fruit, and fragrant with scents that had never before existed on Earth. This botanical revolution reshaped dinosaur ecology. Herbivorous dinosaurs gained access to new food sources, leaves, fruits, and seeds, with different nutritional profiles than the conifers and ferns they had fed on for millions of years. The sophisticated dental batteries of hadrosaurs may have been an adaptation to processing these tougher, more diverse plant materials. Smaller dinosaurs and early birds likely fed on fruits and nectar, and in doing so may have served as pollinators and seed dispersers. Fossilized coprolites sometimes contain seeds, showing that dinosaurs swallowed them while feeding and deposited them, intact and viable, far from the parent plant. In this way, dinosaurs served as gardeners of their world, carrying the building blocks of future forests in their guts. The relationship ran even deeper than diet. Large sauropod herds consuming and processing vast quantities of vegetation produced enormous volumes of methane through the bacterial fermentation in their digestive tracts, the same process that makes modern cattle significant contributors to atmospheric methane. A 2012 study estimated that Mesozoic sauropods collectively may have produced enough methane to measurably warm the global climate, the breath and digestion of living animals influencing the temperature of an entire planet. It is a humbling thought, and it underscores the profound interconnection between life and the physical systems of the Earth. Sharing the Mesozoic, dinosaurs dominated the Mesozoic, but they did not rule alone. They shared their world with a supporting cast of creatures that filled every other available niche, from the deepest burrows to the highest skies. Mammals had been evolving alongside dinosaurs since the late Triassic, more than 200 million years ago. For most of that time they were small, often no bigger than a shrew or a rat, and almost certainly nocturnal, emerging only under cover of darkness to hunt insects, eat seeds, and avoid the attention of larger predators. Their fossils show a quiet persistence, a talent for survival in the margins. Some were gliders, stretching membranes between elongated limbs. Others dug burrows. A few were aquatic, and at least one, Repenomamus from Cretaceous China, was bold enough to eat baby dinosaurs. A fossil of this badger-sized mammal was found with the bones of a young Psittacosaurus in its stomach, proof that the balance of power between dinosaurs and mammals was not entirely one-sided. The skies of the Mesozoic were dominated not by birds but by pterosaurs, flying reptiles that were close relatives of dinosaurs but not dinosaurs themselves. Pterosaurs were the first vertebrates to achieve true powered flight, beating dinosaurs to the air by millions of years. They ranged enormously in size. Some were as small as sparrows, others were among the largest flying animals ever to exist. Quetzalcoatlus, from the late Cretaceous of North America, had a wingspan exceeding 30 feet and, when standing on the ground, was as tall as a giraffe. It may have stalked prey on land like a monstrous stork, snatching up small animals in its enormous, toothless beak. Other pterosaurs skimmed fish from oceans, soared over coastlines like living gliders, or filtered tiny organisms from shallow lagoons. For over 150 million years, they filled the aerial niches that birds would later inherit, sharing the stage with dinosaurs in an ecosystem of breathtaking complexity. Beneath the waves, the picture was equally rich. Ichthyosaurs, shaped like dolphins but descended from land reptiles, patrolled the oceans during the Triassic and Jurassic, hunting fish and squid with speed and precision. Plesiosaurs, with their long necks and paddle-shaped limbs, cruised through Cretaceous seas. Mosasaurs, massive marine lizards related to modern monitors, became the apex predators of the late Cretaceous oceans, growing to lengths of 40 feet or more. None of these marine reptiles were dinosaurs. That distinction is important. Dinosaurs were a land-based group, but together, the dinosaurs on land, the pterosaurs in the air, and the marine reptiles in the sea created a Mesozoic world that was saturated with reptilian life in a way our mammal-dominated modern world can scarcely imagine. Even the insect world was transformed during the age of dinosaurs. Beetles, flies, ants, bees and butterflies all diversified during the Mesozoic, many of them co-evolving with the flowering plants that were simultaneously reshaping terrestrial ecosystems. Amber from the Cretaceous preserves these insects in exquisite detail, frozen mid-flight, mid-bite, mid-pollination, their bodies as vivid and three-dimensional as the day they were trapped. The Mesozoic was not just the age of dinosaurs, it was the age of a complete, interconnected world, every part dependent on every other, life layered upon life in dizzying complexity. The seas of the Mesozoic. While dinosaurs ruled the land, the oceans of the Mesozoic were kingdoms of their own, ancient seas filled with creatures as spectacular and as varied as anything that walked on shore. The ichthyosaurs came first, appearing in the Triassic alongside the earliest dinosaurs. They were descended from land-dwelling reptiles that returned to the sea, much as the ancestors of modern dolphins did hundreds of millions of years later. Over time, they evolved a body plan startlingly similar to that of a tuna or a dolphin. A streamlined, torpedo-shaped torso, a tall, crescent-shaped tail fin for powerful thrust, large eyes for hunting in the dim depths, and flippers where their ancestors had legs. They were among the fastest swimmers of the Mesozoic, pursuing fish and squid through open waters with the speed and agility of any modern predator. Some species grew to over 60 feet in length, longer than a humpback whale. Ichthyosaurs achieved something remarkable for reptiles. They gave birth to live young in the water. Fossils have been found preserving mothers with embryos still inside them, and in at least one extraordinary case, a baby ichthyosaur in the process of being born, its head already emerging from its mother's body. These fossils are among the most intimate and poignant in all of paleontology, snapshots of the fundamental act of bringing new life into the world, preserved for 250 million years. The plesiosaurs occupied a different niche. With their broad, flat bodies, 4 powerful paddle-shaped flippers, and, in many species, extraordinarily long necks, they moved through the water with a rowing motion unlike that of any modern animal. The long-necked varieties, like Elasmosaurus, could extend their heads far from their bodies to snatch fish from schools without disturbing them with the movement of their torsos. Short-necked plesiosaurs, called pliosaurs, were the apex predators of their marine ecosystems. Leopleurodon and Kronosaurus possessed massive skulls, powerful jaws, and teeth designed for seizing large prey. A pliosaur in pursuit was every bit as terrifying as a Tyrannosaurus on land. In the final act of the Mesozoic, the mosasaurs rose to prominence. These were marine lizards, relatives of modern monitor lizards, that evolved into fully aquatic predators during the late Cretaceous. Mosasaurus, the genus that gives the group its name, could grow to over 40 feet in length with a long, muscular body, a powerful tail, and jaws filled with conical teeth designed for gripping slippery prey. Mosasaurs occupied the ecological role of modern orcas and great white sharks, and they were so successful that by the end of the Cretaceous, they were the undisputed apex predators of the world's oceans. They vanished in the same extinction that took the non-avian dinosaurs, leaving their niches open for the marine mammals that would eventually fill them. None of these magnificent creatures were dinosaurs. That point bears repeating because it is commonly misunderstood. Dinosaurs were a land-based group. Ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and mosasaurs were separate lineages of marine reptiles, each with their own evolutionary history and their own place in the tree of life. But they shared the same planet, the same era, and the same fate. Together with the dinosaurs on land and the pterosaurs in the air, they formed a Mesozoic biosphere of staggering richness. a world in which reptilian life dominated every major habitat, from the deepest ocean trench to the highest mountaintop, in a way that has never been repeated. Imagine standing on the shore of a Cretaceous sea. The water is warm and shallow, tinted green with algae. A pterosaur glides overhead on silent wings, scanning the surface for fish. Farther out, the dark shadow of a mosasaur passes beneath the waves, its body undulating in slow, sinuous curves. On the beach behind you, the tracks of a hadrosaur herd mark the wet sand, leading inland toward a forest hazy with pollen. Everything is alive. Every element of the ecosystem is connected. The dinosaurs on land, the pterosaurs in the air, the marine reptiles in the sea, the insects in the trees, the flowering plants just beginning their takeover of the botanical world. It is a world complete unto itself, as rich and as intricate as our own, and it endured for far longer. It is also a world entirely gone, erased in a single geological moment by a rock falling from the sky, and yet, through the patient work of people who chip at stone and peer through microscopes, it lives again in our understanding, our imagination, and on quiet evenings like this one, in the stories we tell as we drift towards sleep. The Bridge to Birds. Perhaps the most profound truth about dinosaurs is that they are not entirely gone. One lineage survived the Great Extinction and continues today in a form so familiar that we rarely stop to marvel at it. Every bird alive, from the house sparrow to the wandering albatross, is a dinosaur, not metaphorically, not poetically, biologically. Birds are classified within Theropoda, the same group that includes Velociraptor, Tyrannosaurus, and all the other two-legged predators of the Mesozoic. They are, in the strict language of evolutionary taxonomy, avian dinosaurs. The fossil record charts this transition with remarkable clarity. Archaeopteryx, discovered in a Bavarian limestone quarry in 1861, was the first fossil to reveal the bridge between dinosaurs and birds. It had the teeth, clawed fingers, and long bony tail of a theropod dinosaur, but also the feathers and wings of a bird. It was a creature caught mid-transformation, a snapshot of evolution in progress. Archaeopteryx probably could not fly with the sustained powered strokes of a modern bird, but it likely glided and flapped in short bursts, exploiting a niche somewhere between the trees and the ground. Since Archaeopteryx, dozens of transitional fossils have been found, each one filling in another piece of the puzzle. The line from small feathered theropods to modern birds is now documented in such detail that the transition is one of the best supported evolutionary sequences in all of paleontology. Shared features span anatomy, behavior, and physiology. The wishbone, that familiar bone snapped apart for luck over a holiday meal, is a dinosaurian feature present in theropods long before birds evolved. Brooding behavior, hollow bones, the structure of the respiratory system, the development of feathers, all trace back to dinosaur ancestors. The question of how dinosaurs regulated their body temperature, the warm-blooded versus cold-blooded debate, also finds its clearest resolution in the context of the bird connection. The evidence now points toward a metabolic spectrum. Small, active theropods, the ancestors of birds, were almost certainly fully endothermic, generating their own body heat and maintaining high activity levels regardless of external temperature. Large sauropods likely achieved thermal stability through gigantothermy. Their enormous body mass retained heat so effectively that their temperatures remained stable without a high metabolic rate, much as a massive body of water resists temperature change. Other species fell at various points along this spectrum, with metabolisms more active than any modern reptile, but not necessarily identical to those of modern mammals. The term mesothermic, meaning intermediate, has been applied to this middle ground. The old binary of warm versus cold is simply too crude to describe the physiological diversity of a group that spanned 165 million years and included animals from mouse-sized to mountain-sized. When you next see a bird, any bird, pause for a moment. Watch how it tilts its head, how it hops and pecks, how it preens its feathers with quick, precise movements. You are watching a dinosaur. The lineage that began with creatures like Eoraptor in the Triassic, that diversified through the Jurassic and Cretaceous into thousands of forms, and that survived the greatest catastrophe in 65 million years of terrestrial history, is still with us. The dinosaurs did not vanish. They took wing, fossils and preservation. Everything we know about dinosaurs comes from fossils, the preserved remains and traces of ancient life, and the variety of what fossils can capture is far broader than most people realize. The most familiar fossils are bones and teeth, mineralized over millions of years, as the original organic material was slowly replaced by minerals from groundwater. Under the right conditions, rapid burial in fine sediment, stable chemistry, minimal disturbance, bones can survive in astonishing detail, preserving not just overall shape, but internal structures, growth rings, blood vessel channels, even the microscopic texture of the bone surface. Teeth, which are already heavily mineralized in life, are among the most durable biological structures and survive in the fossil record in enormous numbers. A single fossilized tooth can tell us about diet, growth rate, and even the animal's position in the food chain. But fossils extend far beyond bones. Skin impressions preserved when a dinosaur's body pressed against fine sediment before decomposition show the textures of life. Pebbly scales arranged in mosaics, downy feather patterns, stiff quills standing in sharp outline. Some impressions reveal variations in scale size across the body, hinting at color patterns or functional differences between regions of skin. These rare specimens collapse millions of years into a tactile immediacy that bones alone cannot provide. Amber, fossilized tree resin, has proven to be one of the most extraordinary preservation mediums in all of paleontology. In the warm forests of the Cretaceous, resin dripped from trees and occasionally engulfed small objects, insects, plant fragments, and, in a few precious cases, dinosaur feathers. Specimens from Myanmar preserve individual feathers in breathtaking three-dimensional detail, with visible barbs, branching structures, and even pigmentation. One remarkable specimen contains what appears to be part of a small dinosaur's tail, complete with feathers, preserved in golden resin as though time itself stopped. Perhaps the most startling discoveries of recent decades involve soft tissue preservation. In 2005, paleontologist Mary Schweitzer and her team announced the discovery of flexible, vessel-like structures inside the femur bone of a Tyrannosaurus rex. These structures resembled blood vessels, and subsequent analysis identified preserved proteins, including collagen, the building block of connective tissue. The findings were initially met with skepticism, but they have been replicated in other specimens and are now widely accepted. The mechanisms that allowed proteins to survive for tens of millions of years are still being studied, but the fact of their survival is no longer in serious doubt. It is important to be clear about what these discoveries do not mean. The preserved material is not DNA. That molecule is far too fragile and chemically unstable to survive the spans of time involved. We are not approaching the ability to clone dinosaurs, and the fantasy of Jurassic Park remains firmly in the realm of fiction. What we have instead are molecular fingerprints, fragmentary but genuine traces of the biochemistry of living dinosaurs. They allow comparisons with modern animals that confirm evolutionary relationships. Dinosaur collagen is most similar to that of birds and open new windows into physiology and biology that bones alone cannot provide. Even footprints, coprolites, and stomach contents, what paleontologists call trace fossils, are invaluable. They record behavior rather than anatomy, how an animal moved, what it ate, how fast it ran, whether it traveled alone or in groups. A footprint captures a single moment of contact between a living animal and the earth, a moment that, through the improbable alchemy of geology, has endured for 100 million years. It is a humbling thought. Every fossil, from the grandest skeleton to the smallest coprolite, is an act of preservation so unlikely that its existence feels almost like a gift. The human story of discovery. Humans have been finding dinosaur bones for as long as they have been digging into the earth, long before the science of paleontology existed, long before anyone knew what a dinosaur was. People encountered enormous fossils and tried to make sense of them with the stories and frameworks available to them. The results were myths that persisted for centuries. In China, where a deep tradition of dragon lore stretches back thousands of years, large fossilized bones were labeled dragon bones. They were collected, ground into powder, and sold as medicine, a practice that, remarkably, continued well into the 20th century. We will never know how many scientifically priceless fossils were consumed as traditional remedies, their stories swallowed along with the powder. In Europe, enormous femurs and vertebrae unearthed in fields and quarries were sometimes attributed to giants, the remnants of a race of enormous humans who had walked the earth in biblical or mythical times. In the 17th century, a massive femur found in England was described by a clergyman as belonging to a giant man. Without any framework for understanding extinction, deep time, or the existence of entirely different kinds of life, people interpreted what they found through the lens of what they already believed. The bones were real. The stories built around them were as imaginative as any work of fiction. The transformation from mythology to science began in the early 19th century. In 1824, the geologist William Buckland published a description of a large jaw fragment from Oxfordshire and named it Megalosaurus, great lizard. It was the first dinosaur to receive a formal scientific name, though the concept of dinosaurs as a distinct group did not yet exist. The following year, the physician Gideon Mantell described Iguanodon from teeth found in Sussex, initially imagining it as an enormous iguana-like reptile. Mantell's wife, Mary Ann, is sometimes credited with finding the first tooth, though the details are debated. What is not debated is that these early discoveries sparked a growing realization: the Earth had once been home to creatures fundamentally unlike anything alive. In 1842, the anatomist Richard Owen synthesized the available evidence and formally created the group Dinosauria, recognizing that Megalosaurus, Iguanodon, and the armored Hylaeosaurus belonged to a single extraordinary lineage of extinct reptiles. Owen was a brilliant anatomist, but also a difficult and ambitious man, and his creation of the Dinosauria was partly an exercise in scientific empire building. Nevertheless, the concept electrified the public. Owen collaborated with the sculptor Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins to create life-sized dinosaur models for the Crystal Palace Park in London, models that still stand today, wonderfully inaccurate, monuments to a moment when humanity first glimpsed the deep past. Then came the Bone Wars. In the latter decades of the 19th century, two American paleontologists, Othniel Charles Marsh of Yale and Edward Drinker Cope of Philadelphia, became embroiled in one of the most notorious scientific rivalries in history. Both men were brilliant, both were wealthy, and both were consumed by the desire to discover more dinosaurs than the other. They dispatched crews into the American West, Wyoming, Colorado, Montana, Nebraska, to dig with furious speed. The competition produced extraordinary results. Marsh's teams unearthed Triceratops, Stegosaurus, and Allosaurus. Cope described Camarasaurus, Dimetrodon, and dozens of others. Between them, they named over 100 new species in just a few decades. Museums filled with skeletons that astonished the public and transformed paleontology from a genteel pastime into a major science. But the rivalry had a dark side. Crews sometimes dynamited fossil sites after excavating what they wanted to prevent the other team from finding anything useful. Mistakes were rampant. Skeletons were sometimes assembled with the wrong skulls, or described from fragments too incomplete to support the classifications given them. Cope once reconstructed a plesiosaur with its head on the wrong end, a humiliation that Marsh gleefully publicized. Some of the species they named were later found to be duplicates, the same animal described twice under different names because neither man bothered to compare his finds carefully with the others. The bone wars were messy, dramatic, and scientifically reckless, but they opened the American West's treasure trove of fossils and ignited a worldwide fascination with dinosaurs that has never faded. Today, the pace of discovery continues to accelerate. New dinosaur species are formally described at a rate of roughly a dozen or more per year. Over 1,000 species have been named to date, and the true number of dinosaur species that once existed is certainly many times greater. Perhaps 10,000 or more, most of which will never be found because the conditions for fossilization are so rare. Advanced technologies, CT scanning that reveals internal structures without cutting into the rock, synchrotron imaging that maps chemical composition at microscopic scales, isotope analysis that reveals diet and migration patterns, have given paleontologists tools that the bone hunters of the 19th century could never have imagined. And still, some of the most important finds are made by accident. A farmer in Argentina notices a strange rock protruding from an eroded hillside and calls a museum. A construction crew in China uncovers bones while digging a foundation. A hiker in Montana stumbles on a fragment of jaw poking through a cliff face. In Canada, a heavy equipment operator working in an oil sands mine scraped through rock and unearthed the most perfectly preserved armored dinosaur ever found. A nodosaur. Its skin, armor, and even some stomach contents intact after more than 110 million years. It now rests in a museum in Alberta, looking less like a fossil and more like a sleeping animal, as if it might open its eyes at any moment. The Earth still holds countless secrets beneath its surface, and every new discovery rewrites some small part of the story. The science of paleontology, which began with a jaw fragment in Oxfordshire 2 centuries ago, is still, in the most fundamental sense, just getting started. A changing planet. Throughout their 165 million years, dinosaurs witnessed changes to the planet that dwarf anything in human experience. Continents that were joined became islands. Oceans opened and closed like slow-motion doors. Mountain ranges rose from plains and then eroded back to gentle hills over timescales that make human civilizations look like the flutter of an eyelash. Sea levels rose and fell by hundreds of feet, flooding continental interiors to create vast shallow seas teeming with marine life, and then retreating to expose new land for colonization. The Western Interior Seaway, which split North America in two during the late Cretaceous, was one such inland sea, a warm, shallow body of water stretching from the Gulf of Mexico to the Arctic Ocean, dividing the continent into eastern and western landmasses. Dinosaurs on the eastern side evolved separately from those on the west, producing distinct communities with different dominant species. The seaway was home to mosasaurs, giant sea turtles, and enormous fish, while its shores and islands supported unique coastal ecosystems that blended marine and terrestrial life. Climate, too, shifted dramatically across the Mesozoic. The Triassic was hot and dry in many regions, with vast deserts in the continental interior of Pangaea. The Jurassic brought warmer, more humid conditions as seas expanded and moderated temperatures. By the Cretaceous, global temperatures were significantly warmer than today. There were no permanent ice caps at either pole, and tropical forests extended much closer to the Arctic and Antarctic circles than they do now. Carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere were several times higher than present-day concentrations, creating a greenhouse world in which warmth-loving organisms thrived at latitudes we now associate with tundra and permafrost. Through all of this, the dinosaurs adapted. When forests spread, herbivores evolved to feed on new kinds of vegetation. When deserts encroached, populations shifted to wetter refugia or evolved drought tolerance. When seaways isolated populations, natural selection pushed those populations in new directions, producing the staggering regional diversity we see in the fossil record. The dinosaurs were not static residents of a single world. They were dynamic inhabitants of a planet in constant motion, and their success was due in no small part to their extraordinary ability to change with it. It is easy, when we look at fossils in a museum, to forget this. We see a skeleton mounted in a single pose, labelled with a single name, and imagine it frozen in time. But every skeleton represents a species that existed for millions of years. A species that experienced countless generations, survived environmental upheavals, competed with rivals, fled from predators, raised young, and dispersed across continents. Behind every fossil is an epic, and behind every epic is a world that was never still. A meditation on deep time. There is something disorienting about contemplating the timescales involved in the story of dinosaurs. Our minds evolved to process human-sized spans of time, a day, a season, a lifetime. We can grasp centuries with effort and millennia with the help of history. But millions of years, hundreds of millions, lie beyond the reach of intuition. We can say the numbers. We cannot truly feel them. And yet the attempt is worth making, because deep time is the context in which the story of dinosaurs makes sense. Without it, they are curiosities, big bones in a museum, names on a placard. With it, they become something far more profound, evidence that the Earth has been alive with complex, extraordinary beings for spans of time that dwarf all of human experience. They remind us that we are newcomers on an ancient planet, inheritors of a legacy we did not create and can barely comprehend. Consider this. If the entire history of the Earth, roughly 4.5 billion years, were compressed into a single 24-hour clock, the first dinosaurs would appear at about 10:40 in the evening. They would reign until 11:39 at night. The asteroid would strike 1 minute before midnight. The entire history of Homo sapiens, every tool, every language, every civilization, every song, would fit into the final fraction of a second before the clock struck 12. In that sliver of time, we have learned to find the bones of the creatures that dominated the hours before us. We have pieced together their stories from fragments of stone. We have named them, classified them, and come to understand in broadening detail how they lived and died. It is one of the most remarkable achievements of the human mind, the ability to reach backward across 66 million years and reconstruct, with increasing precision, the lives of animals that no human eye ever saw. And the story is not finished. Every year, new fossils emerge, new species are named, new techniques reveal details that were invisible a decade ago. The dinosaurs are still teaching us about evolution, about adaptation, about the fragility and resilience of life on a changing planet. Their story, though anchored in the deep past, remains urgently relevant to a species that is, right now, altering the same global systems, climate, ecosystems, biodiversity that once shaped the dinosaur world. But those are thoughts for another day. Tonight, the dinosaurs are simply a story, the longest bedtime story ever told, stretching back not through the pages of a book, but through the very rock beneath us. Let them rest, as they have rested for 66 million years, in the patient silence of stone, and let yourself rest alongside them. We have travelled far together through the ancient world. We have walked beneath the shadows of the tallest animals ever to stand on land, listened to the calls of creatures whose voices have been silent for 66 million years, and marvelled at the strangeness and beauty of forms that evolution will never produce again. It has been a long journey, and there is one chapter left to tell. The hardest one. The ending. But before we go there, pause once more. Feel the stillness of the room around you. Notice how your body has settled deeper into rest since we began. Your breath comes more slowly now, your thoughts drift more gently. If you are already on the edge of sleep, that is perfectly fine. Let the words carry you. There is nothing you need to hold on to. The dinosaurs lived their lives without any knowledge of what was coming. For 165 million years, they simply lived, eating, growing, nesting, calling to one another across landscapes that seemed as permanent as the stars. They did not know they were part of a chapter that would end. They experienced each day as the only day there was. There is something peaceful in that. A reminder that living well does not require knowing the future. It only requires being present in the moment that exists. Take one more deep breath, and when you are ready, we will follow the dinosaurs to the end of their long, extraordinary day. The cataclysm. For 165 million years, the dinosaurs endured everything the planet threw at them. Volcanic eruptions, shifting continents, changing climates, rising and falling seas. They adapted, they diversified, they thrived. And then, roughly 66 million years ago, something happened that no adaptation could withstand. An asteroid approximately 6 miles in diameter, a rock larger than Mount Everest is tall, struck the Earth at a velocity estimated at over 40,000 miles per hour. It hit what is now the northern tip of the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, in a shallow sea that covered the region at the time. The impact created the Chicxulub crater, a scar approximately 110 miles wide that is now buried beneath hundreds of feet of sediment and the waters of the Gulf of Mexico. It is invisible from the surface, but seismic surveys have mapped its outline in precise detail. It remains one of the largest confirmed impact structures in the solar system. The energy released in that instant was staggering. Scientists estimate it was equivalent to several billion nuclear weapons detonated simultaneously, a figure so far beyond human experience that it defies any meaningful intuition. Within seconds, the asteroid had punched through the Earth's crust, vaporizing rock, seawater, and everything in the immediate vicinity. A column of superheated debris rocketed into the upper atmosphere and beyond, arcing across the sky before raining back down on the far side of the planet. The immediate effects were catastrophic. Shockwaves radiated outward from the impact site at tremendous speed, triggering earthquakes of unimaginable magnitude around the globe. Tsunamis, walls of water hundreds of feet tall, raced across the Gulf of Mexico and slammed into coastlines as far away as what is now Texas, carrying debris miles inland. Sediment layers from this event have been found across the Americas, recording the passage of these monstrous waves in geological strata that can be read like a timeline of destruction. As the superheated ejecta re-entered the atmosphere, friction heated the air to temperatures high enough to ignite vegetation. Wildfires erupted across entire continents. A layer of soot and charcoal in the geological record marks this global firestorm, evidence that forests burned from the Americas to Africa to Asia. For any animal caught in the open, the thermal pulse alone would have been lethal. Even underground, the heat would have been intense enough to sterilize the surface layer of soil. But the most devastating effects were not immediate. They were slow, insidious, and relentless. The impact injected hundreds of billions of tons of dust, ash, sulfur aerosols, and soot into the upper atmosphere. This material spread around the globe, forming a shroud dense enough to block a significant fraction of sunlight. The world dimmed, temperatures plunged. What scientists call an impact winter set in, a period of months or perhaps years during which global temperatures dropped dramatically and sunlight was too weak to sustain photosynthesis in most plants. The consequences cascaded through every ecosystem on Earth. Without adequate sunlight, photosynthetic organisms, the base of nearly all food chains, faltered and died. On land, forests withered. Ferns and fast-growing ground cover may have temporarily dominated the landscape, a phenomenon recorded in the fossil record as a spike in fern spores at the boundary between the Cretaceous and Paleogene periods. In the oceans, phytoplankton collapsed, triggering a chain reaction that devastated marine food webs from the bottom up. Herbivores starved as plant matter became scarce. Predators, deprived of prey, followed. The darkness was compounded by acid rain. Sulfur compounds ejected into the stratosphere combined with water vapor to form sulfuric acid, which fell back to Earth in rainfall that acidified soils and surface waters. Organisms with calcium carbonate shells, from tiny marine foraminifera to larger mollusks, were especially vulnerable as the acid dissolved their protective structures. It was not a single disaster, but a cascade of interlocking catastrophes, each one amplifying the others: fire, darkness, cold, acid, starvation, and all of it happening against a backdrop of extraordinary volcanic activity. The Deccan Traps, a massive province of volcanic rock in what is now India, had been erupting for hundreds of thousands of years before the asteroid struck. These eruptions poured vast quantities of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere, stressing ecosystems and potentially warming the climate before the impact reversed everything with its sudden cooling. Some scientists believe the volcanic activity weakened the biosphere, making it more vulnerable to the asteroid's finishing blow. Others argue that the asteroid alone was sufficient. The debate continues, but both factors almost certainly played a role. When the dust, literally, settled, the scale of the destruction was almost total. More than 75% of all species on Earth had been wiped out. The non-avian dinosaurs were gone, so were the pterosaurs, so were the mosasaurs and plesiosaurs in the oceans. Ammonites, the coiled-shelled cephalopods that had thrived for hundreds of millions of years, vanished entirely. Entire ecosystems were erased, replaced by barren landscapes where the survivors, small, adaptable, often underground or aquatic, began the long process of rebuilding. The boundary between the Cretaceous and Paleogene periods, the moment when the old world ended and the new one began, is recorded in a thin layer of clay found in geological strata around the world. This clay is enriched in iridium, a rare element that is uncommon in Earth's crust but abundant in asteroids. Its presence in this single, global layer is one of the key pieces of evidence linking the extinction to an extraterrestrial impact. It is, in a very real sense, the fingerprint of the asteroid, written in the chemistry of the Earth itself. Transformation. The extinction was total for the non-avian dinosaurs, but it was not the end of their story. Deep within the wreckage of the old world, one lineage of small feathered theropods held on. They were the ancestors of modern birds. Why did they survive when so many others perished? No single answer is certain, but several factors likely contributed. Birds were small, much smaller than most non-avian dinosaurs, and small animals generally need less food to sustain themselves through a crisis. Their diets were flexible: seeds, insects, and other food sources that could persist in a degraded environment. Many could fly, giving them the ability to cover large distances in search of remaining resources. Some may have been able to shelter in burrows or crevices. Whatever the exact combination of advantages, it was enough. They endured the worst catastrophe to strike the planet in 65 million years, and when the skies finally cleared and the forests began to regrow, they were there to fill the emptied world. The recovery was slow. It took millions of years for ecosystems to fully restabilize, but when they did, the survivors radiated explosively. Mammals, freed from competition with dinosaurs, diversified into the vast array of forms we know today: whales, bats, primates, elephants, horses, the entire pageant of mammalian life. And birds, inheriting the ecological legacy of their theropod ancestors, diversified into more than 10,000 species that now occupy virtually every habitat on Earth, from the open ocean to the highest mountaintops, from tropical rainforests to the frozen shores of Antarctica. When you see a robin pulling a worm from a lawn, you are watching a theropod dinosaur use the same basic body plan that its ancestors used to hunt insects in Cretaceous forests. When you hear the call of a crow, you are hearing a voice shaped by the same evolutionary pressures that shaped Parasaurolophus. When a peregrine falcon dives at over 200 miles per hour, it is demonstrating the aerodynamic heritage of 150 million years of dinosaurian experimentation with feathers, hollow bones, and efficient respiration. The dinosaurs, in the deepest and most meaningful sense, never went extinct. They transformed. What was lost was the grandeur of the non-avian forms: the sauropods, the tyrannosaurs, the ceratopsians, the hadrosaurs, the armored ankylosaurs. What survived was the essence of the lineage, refined by catastrophe and carried forward in feathers and song. It is a story that cuts both ways. It speaks to the fragility of even the most dominant forms of life. 165 million years of success ended in a geological instant. And it speaks to the extraordinary resilience of life itself, the capacity to absorb devastation, to find a way through, and to emerge transformed on the other side. And so our journey through deep time draws to its close. We have walked beside giants whose footsteps shook the ground. We have watched tiny feathered hunters dart through canopies alive with color. We have heard, in our imagination, the deep, resonant calls of hadrosaurs rolling across ancient floodplains, and felt the subsonic tremor of a predator's voice in our bones. We have seen armor thick enough to withstand the most powerful bite in the history of land animals, and feathers delicate enough to shimmer with iridescent light. We have stood at the edge of nests where devoted parents refused to leave their young, and we have traced the vast trackways of herds moving together across landscapes that no longer exist. The dinosaurs remind us of something we easily forget. The world is old, incomprehensibly old, and it has been home to wonders beyond counting. Life has been inventing, experimenting, and reinventing itself for billions of years, and the chapter occupied by dinosaurs, vast as it was, is just one chapter in a far longer story. Before them came other marvels, after them came us. And after us will come something else, something we cannot predict, shaped by forces we may never understand. But for now, in this quiet moment, the dinosaurs are enough. Let your breathing slow. Feel the weight of your body pressing gently into wherever you rest. Imagine the world not as it is, but as it once was. A warm Cretaceous evening, the air thick with the scent of flowering plants, ferns stirring in a soft breeze, the distant sound of water moving over stones. Somewhere beyond the tree line, the low call of a hadrosaur, patient and unhurried, fading into the hum of insects, the sky deepening from amber to indigo, stars appearing one by one in the same patterns they held 66 million years ago. The giants are asleep, the forest is still. The only sound is the slow rhythm of your own breathing, steady and calm, matching the ancient pulse of the earth beneath you. Rest now. The story will be here when you wake. Good night.